This is a Fire Ice aggro deck, and in my opinion, this is the premier aggro deck of the Opus 3 meta right now. I want to play Shulk. I want to play Shulk first turn, every turn. I want Shulk out there, and I want Shulk to be grabbing me all of my really good 2-drop fire backups. What Shulk does, when you play Shulk, she's a 3-cost ice forward. She's got 5,000 power, but she allows you to play a forward of any element except ice of cost 2 or less from your hand on the field, and when you do, you force your opponent to discard a card. This is just a really good play. This is a really good card, and this deck tries to make the most out of that play. With Shulk, in this particular build of Fire and Ice, we have the 2-cost VV backup from the Final Fantasy IX starter deck. We have Gadot from Opus 1, who's a 2-drop 4K, and I'm gonna take a second to talk about Gadot a little bit more too, because in your dream hand when you're playing this deck is you're playing Shulk turn 1, and with Shulk's effect you're bringing in Gadot, and with Gadot's effect he allows you to play a fire forward of cost 2 or less from your hand onto the field when he enters. So you have a chain reaction of these small but really efficient forwards that you're able to just kind of explode into. And if it's my dream hand, with Gadot, I am playing the 2-cost Tifa from Opus 1. And Tifa's just a vanilla 4K. She's got haste. So in my opener, if I'm living the dream, is that I just drop 3 forwards on my first turn and I'm swinging at my opponent for a point of damage. It's fantastic. And within that package, we can't forget about Warrior of Light. He is the 2-cost 5K fire forward from Opus 1, and he allows you to deal double damage to forwards of cost 4 or more. And I think throwing a Warrior Light at a Delita, if they're sitting on a Delita backup from Opus 3, feels pretty good. To see this super powerful 5-cost legend from the newest set kind of being taken down by the little guy from Opus 1, it feels really good. And last but not least is we have Ephemeral Phantom in this build. A lot of Fire Ice decks don't play this card. A lot of them opt for the 2-cost Cloud from Opus 1, who gets a buff from having other Final Fantasy VII characters on the field. But I like the addition of Ephemeral Phantom in this deck. He's a mannequin, so you can play multiple copies of him on the field, which is great. And he also gets a 2k buff to his normal 5,000 power if your opponent controls 2 or more forwards. It's pretty relevant, actually. 7k forward for 2 is good. So those are all really efficient cards, and they make up the aggro part of this deck. A couple other cards I want to talk about that I was personally excited about, and I know a lot of other people were excited about, are the German Nationals. Since this was the winner of that tournament, was the inclusion of Zodiac, Keeper of Precepts, and Feral Chaos. Specifically Zodiac, but Feral Chaos is good too. Zodiac is a very powerful summon from Opus 3 that has seen some play, but now that we've seen it win a national championship, I think everyone has their eyes on this card more than they ever have had before. It's great. I'm going to talk about Zodiac here for a second. If you control a Dark forward, the cost to cast Zodiac, its original cost is 7, is reduced by 3. So with Feral Chaos in this deck, you have the potential of casting Zodiac for only 4 crystal points. A board wipe for 4 crystal points. It's very powerful. The downside of this is when you're breaking your opponent's forwards this way, you're going to take a point of damage for each forward that you break. It sounds bad, but in this deck, you're putting so much pressure on your opponent that they're usually on the back foot. They're not swinging at you, you're swinging at them. And that means that they're holding their forwards back. You're not going to have taken as much damage in the game, and you can use your damage as a resource, then your life as a resource for all of you TCG fans, and really put it to use there through Zodiac. And as you saw in the German National Championships, if you watch that game, which if you haven't, I highly encourage you to do, it's going to win you games, and it won that tournament for Casper there. Another inclusion I want to talk about in Casper's build is Tifa. And Tifa, and I'm talking about the 5-cost Tifa. 5-cost Tifa allows you to, when she attacks, choose a forward, and that forward cannot block this turn. She's also a 9k, but with a heavy cost of 5 crystal points. Being able to choose a really tough forward to get around in this deck if you're not able to dull it or freeze it, and I'm thinking about maybe 6-cost push from Opus 3, which is just a huge body out there on the field. This allows you to completely ignore any troublesome forwards like that. Prish is a good choice. Kignazo is another really popular one. You can try and get around the damage reduction, can be kind of annoying. But Tifa allows us to kind of bypass that. On the ice side of things, we have the normal offenders. We already talked about Shulk, but we're looking at 1-cost Snow from Opus 1, which allows you to dull an opponent's forward when it attacks. If you cast a card named Shiva, you can freeze it as well, and this deck does feature 5 copies of Shiva, 3 of the 2-cost from Opus 3 and 2 of the 3-cost from Opus 1. We also have the addition of Genesis from Opus 3, which is just a great, usually a turn 2 play after you drop maybe 2 forwards on your first turn, able to bring out Genesis the next turn and dull and freeze and get in with the 2 or 3 forwards, 3, cross your fingers, forwards that you played on turn 1. We also play Rinoa, which, if you don't know about Rinoa, she's one of the best, arguably the best ice forward in the game right now. She's kind of a pseudo board wipe, where she will dull all of your opponent's forwards when she goes to the break zone, and that means you can either get really aggressive with her and threaten a huge attack, or you can just sit back on her as a blocker until you're ready to make your pivotal play. Another kind of interesting card in this deck that I wanted to take a second to talk about is the inclusion of Sephiroth, the 5 crystal point ice forward. He's the one where when he enters the field, each player discards 2 cards from his or her hand. It might not seem good to a lot of people. This is supposed to be an aggro deck. It's a 5-drop with only 7k power. Why do we want to include this card in our deck? The great thing about Sephiroth is that he forces your opponent to discard those cards. You're usually going to wait until you have a turn where you don't have any cards in your hand, or the cards in your hand are going straight to the cost to play Sephiroth on the field. So you're only getting value out of them, and you're making your opponent pitch 2 cards to be able to do that. And that's great. If they're sitting on a particular play, or if they're holding summons back, depending on what you're doing, Sephiroth's going to be able to get around that or force them to play into those cards prematurely, which can win you games. It's really important. And I wasn't sold on it right away, but I've been doing some play testing, and I'm Team Sephiroth now. He's a great addition. It's just a good deck. I want to be playing this deck. I want to be making my opponent find answers to the aggro that I'm bringing to them. It's better to have questions that your opponent has to find answers for, rather than sitting back. That's how I feel about it. So if you're an aggro fan, play this deck. You're going to enjoy it. Hopefully as much as I enjoy it.